question hanging over Democrats desperate to deprive Donald Trump of a second term. Does Joe Biden have what it takes to go the distance? His campaign, which has largely been covered as one step forward and two gaffe-induced step back, has Democrats privately and publicly starting to wring their hands. New York Times reports, quote, some of his advisors said in interviews that they were privately nervous that his recent gaffe spree would become cemented into the larger narrative of the presidential race. If the accumulation of verbal missteps continues, some Democrats say it will eventually sow doubts about what many primary voters believe is Biden's biggest strength, that he's best positioned to beat Trump. But the Times also reports Biden's advisors worry he's suffering from an unfair double standard, something his primary opponent Tim Ryan brought up when asked about the vice president's recent mistakes.
Look, this is hard. You're traveling, you're exhausted, there's always a microphone in your face. So we're all going to make mistakes, but I think we all have to be very, very careful, because when Trump says something like, it's too bad for the people in Toledo, Ohio, and the shooting was in Dayton, and I'm trying to make the case that I think Trump's mental faculties are diminished, clearly diminished from where he was a few years ago. And so we've got to stay focused on him. He doesn't make any sense. He, is sometimes you can't even understand what he's talking about.
For anyone keeping score at home, just this hour, that's Anthony Scaramucci and Tim Ryan worried about the president's mental faculties. But it's an interesting and important point. Trump hasn't been shy about highlighting Biden's recent flub, a textbook case of the pot calling the kettle black. Remember, this is Donald Trump we're talking about, who once implied Frederick Douglass was still alive, despite being famously dead for more than 100 years, who twice in one speech praised the healthcare system of Nambia, an imaginary land, I believe, from a Disney film, despite the fact that that country doesn't exist. He once shared a video message calling Hurricane Florence one of the wettest storms we've seen from the standpoint of water. Water's standpoint found it wet, and insisted Finland prevents wildfires by raking their forest. All this pales in comparison, though, to Trump's lie count, 12,000 of them, according to the Washington Post, just in the first part of the first term of his presidency. This is what Biden's supporters are pointing out, that Biden may mix up his words and off-the-cuff remarks, but Trump, the most prolific liar in American history, is the one doing real harm. The table's back. I don't get the Biden hand-wringing. Biden, and this conversation about Biden, all this reporting in the New York Times, this really is exclusively fodder for the media and the activists. Voters, I never hear this among Democratic voters.
I don't even know who the byline was in that story. I haven't looked at it. But whoever it was, come on.
I'm sure he's a good reporter. But you don't have to make a lot of calls. This is you call silly. Obama people. You call. I mean, there are a lot of people that say this about Biden.
What do we know about Joe Biden?
Everyone loves Joe Biden.
We know that he has misspoken throughout his entire career. He said stuff he didn't mean. He's mixed stuff up. He said stuff that was awkward. But we know Joe Biden. America kind of knows Joe Biden.
Describes me every day from 4 to 5.
And I really think this, I think the biggest mistake the Biden campaign can make is trying to hold Joe Biden back to a script.
Agree.
Let Biden be Biden.
I agree.
And, is it possible he says something that blows things up? I don't think it's possible in this day and age. And I think the people in Iowa, I think I saw somewhere over something that somebody said, we know what he meant. We know he didn't mean that white kids are smarter than black kids or brown kids. He didn't mean that. We know him. We know that's not what he meant. So I really think what he's got going for him, and I'm not saying that he will make it. I'm not saying that he's the guy. But this notion that him saying things awkwardly somehow makes him vulnerable to Donald Trump, who is a lie a minute, just makes me drink whiskey.
Yeah, I take your point. I think trying to script someone who likes to be famously unscripted is not a good thing. He loses some authenticity as a result of that. In an age of Donald Trump, who says some of the most outrageous things I've heard in my life, and trying to normalize it like this, what he says, what Biden is saying is somewhat negligible in the marathon, which is this presidential race. And part of the reason we're talking about it is because it's not happening in a vacuum, right? You're seeing Elizabeth Warren ascending, and she's run a really tight campaign. You're seeing Cory Booker get stronger on in the campaign, as well as others. So if you're predisposed to thinking that something's wrong with Joe Biden, all those gaffes do is give more credence to that belief. But the majority of voters tend to compartmentalize anyway. They want to like Joe Biden, they're going to continue to find a way to like him.
So I worked for George W. Bush, and I know how voters, right? Okay. But he was beloved.
Yeah.
Not despite of the gaffes, among voters who had to decide who they were more comfortable in their living room, in some regards because of them. And what he was able to do was make fun of himself. So before the press could rip him, he would make fun of himself. And one of the first White House Correspondents' Dinner, he took all the malaprops and and it was, you might have wondered what I meant when I said, is our children learning? And I talked about OBGYNs spreading their love with women. I mean, he leaned into, and I guess my question is a strategic one. Does Joe Biden need to lean into this to get, and again, I don't think this was a gotcha report. I think this was reporting on what people around Biden, including some of the Biden campaign, are saying, and Democratic activists.
They should shut up.
But is there a strategic turn to be made by Biden to lean into this and turn it into that which makes him relatable?
Well, I think that Biden actually has been laughing at himself, and sometimes before anybody else can do it because of those gaffes. But remember, BFD was a gaffe as well in response to the passage of the Affordable Care Act. Everybody loved that gaffe. I always use my hair salon test, and it is, are the women in the hair salon talking about Joe Biden's gaffes? No, they're not, but they're talking about Joe Biden as a prospective nominee for the Democratic Party. And I think that the Biden campaign would do itself well to laugh this off, to allow him to laugh, and to allow him to relax on the campaign trail without worrying about every single thing. And I saw that quote in Iowa, and he actually self-corrected, which he does a lot as well. And there wasn't a lot of reporting on that part of it. And
there never is.
But let Joe Biden be Joe Biden, and I think this is going to be a great competition with some Democratic candidates who are going to go to the test, and it's not going to be about Joe Biden's gaffes.
Real quick, David.
Look, we know that in his gaffes, there's not the malice nor ignorance that we see in Donald Trump's gaffes. But it does present a question of how do you cover this? The reality is there's a reason there's a 20-person field in the Democratic field. And Joe Biden should have to explain himself sometimes when he has a gaffe about poor kids and white kids. There should be moments where he needs to explain himself just as the other 19 do as well, and allow the voters to measure those moments. I was disappointed. I think he could have found a leadership moment, because we know within the Democratic Party there's a conversation about where are we going on matters of race and racial justice and cultural dialogue. That could have been a moment where Joe Biden said, you know what, I misspoke, and it's important for me to clarify that because, like, there's no malice or ignorance like we see from Donald Trump. But at the same time, candidates have to explain themselves sometimes.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.